Welcome back. This is a Daily Brief. We're following quite a number of stories, including the fact that police have been engaging in running battles with the residents and businessmen within the Mirikiti area right here in Nairobi. Victor Law has been covering that particular incident alongside our very own camera person, that is Gabriel Keme, who I'm meant to understand is also still nursing the effects of tear gas in the move to bring you some of those exclusive pictures that we had here. But I can confirm to you that Gabriel Keme is very okay, but it will keep you up to speed about why exactly that incident has been happening all morning. Tear gas and of course roads are being blocked, and the residents there trying to engage the police. So we shall keep you up to speed about that. Victor Law is also on the ground there. But in the meantime, we're just reacting to the fact that Education Cabinet Secretary Ambassador Amina Mohamed has reiterated her stand when reading out the Riot Act. Part of my panel thinks that tougher measures need to be put in place to manage the ongoing cases of indiscipline. Others, actually want to be precise, thinks that the current system does not really understand the modern day child. What is your take? The hashtag is a Daily Brief. Taxi 9 is 21222. Colonel, perhaps you're not relating to the current issues that children are facing, which is why you say that in your day you acted differently.
Well, change must happen. There's no doubt about that. But that change must also be managed. You cannot just change for the benefit of change without changing for a purpose. And as the world moves forward, there is change. Now, as we speak here, there is more change, there is more development in matters education in the United States, in Europe and other countries than there is in Kenya. But we have not heard that students in the US or in those countries are banning schools. So which is this change which is happening in our country that is different from change from
maybe it's a lack of maybe it's a lack of change.
I just wanted to address what he's saying.
Yeah.
Change is there, yes, but it has to be managed in a way that change is positive. You just don't change for change. You change so that you are constructive, you are positive, and you are moving in the right direction. Now, the problem we have in our schools is a combination of many issues. First is the family unit. Secondly is the social setting. Thirdly is the exposure to certain issues when they are still very young.
Okay.
Fourth, there are many of all these things. And therefore, for me, to be able to address this, to punish a child for life for one mistake, I think for me is a bit extreme. If a criminal,
say this is a criminal offense.
If a crime has happened, let that crime be punished. But don't put a caveat in everything that child is going to do for life. For me, that is not right. But a crime is a crime. A criminal is a criminal. They must be dealt with. But when the courts are finished with them, let's leave it at
and not hold them for life.
Yes.
Charles.
Ian, unfortunately, when you're taken to court, the court, unless on mitigation, is not really interested in how you brought up and whether you had lunch the previous day, and that's why you're banning all shops that are selling food. When you commit a crime that is recognized in our laws as a crime, then unfortunately you are treated as that. It's a criminal act, and until such things change, we cannot do much about it. And I appreciate our kids have a lot of pressures on themselves, but I think it is high time now we started appreciating that crime must be prevented, it must be stopped. Now, importantly, and in response to what my younger brother had said, those kids are coming from our homes. We are parents too, and we are the ones who have given birth to them and trained them and brought them up. I have not seen a kid who is burning their bedrooms or their toilets in their village because they are unhappy. How come they go to school and all of a sudden this information that they have, all this knowledge, now they want to ban stuff in school? How come they don't ban their bedrooms and their houses at home? How many have banned their homes? Simply because
therefore, does that disqualify the argument of
exactly, parental? It's not about that. It's about individual.
I still insist that our parenting has been very poor. And our parents, many parents are running away from their responsibilities. And that is why they prefer to take their children, to take their badly brought up children to boarding schools, sometimes at very, very early stages. In fact, one thing we should do is like to do away with primary school boarding completely, because it is the responsibility of the parent to bring up their child and to mold them into what they would like.
As a legislator, is this something you'd perhaps push?
Yes, I would push really for even secondary schools. Maybe we only have a few secondary schools with certain objectives that maybe they are either talent centers or they are for the, those who are very bright and they have certain objectives that they want to attain. We should do as many day schools as possible so that the parent continues to mold the child, not to take it to the teacher who will do both parenting and teaching. Two, we also include social teachings in schools so that our kid can live.
Thank you, Jude. Jim, kindly keep it as short as possible also, or your final word on schools and rest.
Okay, I'll just respond to two things. Number one, frustrations are different across the world. And so just to say why aren't the U.S. banning schools? In the U.S. we have school shootings that are going on, a different level of frustration as well among students. He also asked about why is it that children are not burning their houses. We come from a society where kids are to be seen and not to be heard. And so the hard part, we waited for kids until they got to university. That's how we got student leaders, the likes of James Orengo and the rest of them, who led student protests over school fees, meals and national issues as such. But today, we have kids who know they can be heard when they are still kids. They don't have to wait to get to university so that they can be heard. What I would suggest is that we have to open the channels of communication within the school system so that these kids have a better way of expressing themselves. I agree with the panelists. It is a crime to ban a school, and we have to deal with crime as such.
Okay, developing news right now, and as you can see at the bottom of your screen, the very same Court of Appeal has just made a ruling. Let me just read out to you what they have said. Is that Turkana East Member of Parliament, Court of Appeal has ordered a fresh election for the Lamu senatorial poll. This is affecting the Lamu senator. So we shall keep you up to speed about how that is going on. Like I'd mentioned to you, a very busy week in terms of decisions by the Court of Appeal. But also, let's just listen into a ruling happening right now in Eldoret, where Turkana East Member of Parliament, Mohammed Lokir of ODM, against Nicholas Ngikor of Jubilee, and the ruling is being read out right now. The High Court in Lodwar had upheld Lokir's victory before the petitioner moved to appeal the ruling. Let's listen into the Court of Appeal.
2017, we do not find any substance in the third respondent's complaint that the appeal is defective and the application by third respondent to strike out the appeal on this ground must fail. We have identified various issues of law for determination in the appeal and shall set out all these issues of law as we consider the appeal and later consider whether the election was conducted in compliance with the Constitution and the Elections Act and the implication of Section 83 of the Election Act. The submission made by the parties revolve around Article 81 and 86 of the Constitution. Which laid down the standard that an election must satisfy, and the first issue which has been raised by the appellant in respect to the fact that the first and second respondents did not use the KEMS kits for a period of time on the voting day, and instead opted to use the manual register to identify voters. According to the appellant, the use of KEMS kit is obligatory, and should the KEMS fail, then there is a mandatory procedure that must be followed before resorting to the use of the manual register. the appellant urged the court to find that the first and second respondents were in direct elections technology regulations 2017, regulation 69A of the regulations, as well as the first respondents guidelines to presiding officers at the warden on Form 32A. To determine whether this complaint has any merit, we consider what the law is on the KIMS case. And we point out that it was not disputed that KIMS kits for some polling stations failed for a period of 30 minutes at certain polling stations. We have quoted the law jurisprudence on the use of technology. And the appellant invites us to find that once the electronic voter identification mechanism established pursuant to Section 44 failed, that the procedure contained in the regulation must be followed before the complementary mechanism is activated. In particular, the appellant says that the procedure provided in...
We shall keep you up to speed once the judge is done reading. Once the judge is done reading the ruling there. But in the meantime, we have about 15 minutes to the top of the hour. Development experts have continued to be concerned about how exactly corruption is hindering development, specifically in the third world countries of Africa. Kenya not being left behind, even in the midst of government trying to fight corruption. Joining us right now to talk about development and the war on graft is Dr. David Safo, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the International Center for Evaluation and Development. Thank you, Dr. Safo, for joining us, as well as Steve Ogutu, who's a communications strategist. Dr. Safo, let's start with you. And I know you're planning to bring together stakeholders to just keenly discuss how corruption is affecting development in Africa in general. Just tell us a bit more about why you're concerned as an expert in this field.
You know, one of the problems that we have in Africa is that policymakers and practitioners are coming up with policies and practice that affect the livelihood of people. But at times, the evidence for them to use in order to formulate and shape these policies and practices are lacking. And what we are trying to do is establishing the connection between evidence and public policy making and practices. Yeah. And corruption is part of it. You know, what we see in Africa is that our data or evidence in corruption are on perception. You know, all the surveys that we do in Africa are on perception survey. They are not cases of corruption in the country. Therefore, making policies based on this evidence is initially fraud. And therefore, it is very, very difficult for our government and policymakers to tackle the issue of corruption when we don't have the proper evidence to guide them in making decisions and policies that affect us as an Africa in our context.
But you know, Dr. Safo, one might ask you, there's already enough policies or systems that have been put in place to curb corruption. Is it that they're not working, or do we need to advance them?
The issue is that for you to make policy, you need the evidence that can help you to do it. If you are making a policy on evidence that are just giving you the awareness, like the perception survey,
and not the solutions necessarily.
But not the solution. It doesn't really help you to do the right type of policy. Like when we talk about corruption in Kenya, what type of corruption are we talking about? We have three types of corruption. We have the grand corruption, that is the political influence that everybody is talking about in politics. We have petty corruption that is happening in every organization. You go and you want a passport, you want a permit, you want a land title, and you have to pay somebody. Then we have the state capture. That is private sectors that are controlling government institutions. Without knowing what type of corruption we are tackling with, you go and make a policy or a practice, and which type are you talking about? So you need to know that the evidence I'm using to make the policy is based on a sound data that can help you to tackle the issue. Okay. And that's what we talk about.
I'll come back to you, Dr. Ari, but let me hear from you, Steve. And, you know, the lack of these better policies in place leads to, you know, far much deeper corruption cases. What are some of the consequences we're looking at here in terms of, you know, matters development?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ian. I think just like Dr. Ameyo has mentioned, you know, what we need to see as a country going forward. I know we have a lot of policies in place, but they're not being followed as it's supposed to be, you know, and lack of following these policies that we have or paying lip service to them. That's why we are seeing a very increased level of corruption, you know. Like I mentioned, a recent research that was done indicates that Kenya loses about 400 billion Kenya shillings every year to corruption, you know. And these are money that indeed can be used to develop, you know, this country, to create jobs for the youth who are languishing in poverty, you know, to improve healthcare for that woman who want to, you know, who want to take care of their young ones back in the villages, you know, and to even improve the infrastructure here and there. And so I feel that this kind of event that organizations like ICE, where Dr. Ameyo comes from, trying to put in place, are things that actually stakeholders need to be involved in. The government need to partner with such organizations to make certain that these menace of corruption is addressed. Just as a country, I think I'd like to say that corruption requires a stakeholders approach. You know, it cannot be tackled just by the government. We need to have development players come in place so we can have a collaborative effort to address this.
And Dr. Ameyo, as part of your evidence collection, can you do you disagree with the narrative that almost squarely corruption is within the government and entities?
Well, that is at times some of the myths that we have. That's, you know, when we talk about evidence to demonstrate corruption, we talk about only one aspect of corruption, that is the grand corruption. But we forget the petty corruption that is going on every day, everywhere. We talk about the state capture that is going on everywhere. Therefore, the problem that we are having is that for you to make a policy to address this issue, we leave it to policymakers without citizen participation, without the accountability of everybody, without the institutional reforms that have to happen in order for you to arrest it. And these are some of the things that we need sound data instead of the international collected perception surveys that will rank Kenya. Maybe they said Kenya is ranked 54 among the 54 countries in Africa, and everybody is shaking, and the news dwell on it. But when you look at the stakeholders in Kenya, what are we talking about? And where are that data coming from? And how do we use the data to help our policymakers to come up with policy that will tackle every level that corruption is being affected? Because corruption affects the overall economic performance of every country.
From your understanding, and I know I'd already posed this question to Steve, what kind of consequences do we look at overall?
The consequences are huge. You know, making a policy based on a wrong evidence have a big consequence on the national economy. The structure transformation of every economy depends on the data that they are using to make the decision. And these are some of the issues. You know, when you look at Africa currently, you know, the amount of money that we assume is getting out through corruption is somewhere around 24% of the national GDP. You know, which is a huge amount. But we are aware, everybody in Kenya or any part of Africa is aware that corruption is going on. The problem we have is what solutions can we come up in order to combat it?
Dr. Ame, even with perhaps policies in place, some say that fighting corruption requires behavioral change.
Yes.
How can you do that?
Yes. First of all, what you need is ownership and accountability. For example, if we are going to construct a road in my village, are the villagers aware of the cost of that road? Who is going to do it? How many months is the person going to do it? And what is their role in ensuring that the contractor is doing a good job? So, one, citizens' participation. Two, good institutions. You know, if we have good institutional reform, like Korea, what Korea does is that every year they do institutional survey, and people who get services from those institutions are sent out questionnaires where they answer the services that they have received. Based on that one, they are able to know which institutions are giving the right type of services to the people. In Africa, we don't do that. We need to do those things. We have to hold institutions accountable.
And that is on the 26th of this month in an organization by the Ministry of National Planning as well as Treasury and the International Center for Evaluation and Development and other partners are coming together to talk about the importance of evidence collection for policy change on the war against graft. Steve, could you tell us a bit more about this day and what to expect?
I think Dr. Ameyo can elaborate more on that.
Okay, go ahead.
We are bringing together policymakers, practitioners, researchers who have generated evidence. So the theme of the conference is connecting evidence with policy and practices. And we are inviting all people. It is happening on USIU campus, one of the multi-modern campuses in Kenya. And we are inviting all to come and see how do we use research, evaluation, the evidence that we generate to shape policies that affect people's livelihood, such as corruption and other initiatives that are going on.
And as we finish, implementation of the policies has also been an issue through time because, and you might have had this phrase that Kenya has very good laws, but the problem is implementation, not a new phrase. Your thought on that?
Yes. You know, for you to do, and that is why organizations like International Center for Evaluation and Development are partnering with the National Monitoring and Evaluation under the National Treasury and Planning to come up with strategies, plans to monitor, track, and evaluate implementation of these policies, and then be able to report and demonstrate to citizens that these policies are actually being implemented. These are some of the things that we are working with the government to be able to
Steve, on the issue of implementation and some of the policies that might come up from this event, talk about that.
Well, I think, like it's been explained, it's going to be a really informative session, and I feel that if these the deliberations that are going to be made from there, I hope that the different ministries are going to come up with very clear, policies that are based on evidence, so that we can address corruption from an evidence-based perspective, as opposed to perception, where we just assume that corruption exists, but we don't have the data to really indicate corruption is happening in which level, and then how can we address these menace.
Dr. Ame, your final word, I'd like that to be on the importance of citizenry participation in exercises such as this, but even on the larger picture, the participation on matters governance as well.
Yes, it's very, very important. When you talk about governance, you are talking about people's ability to govern themselves and hold themselves accountable. The good thing and the beauty of accountability or monitoring and evaluation is giving people information to hold those in power accountable for their decisions and practices. And this is what we are trying to advocate with the Ministry for Planning and Treasury, especially the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation, to come up with systems where citizens will be informed to know what is happening so that they will be able to hold those in power accountable, and then accountability will form the basis of governance.
Steve, final word?
I think like we, okay, yesterday was the International Day African Day
of Anti-Corruption.
Yes. And I think, like I said, I think we need to really, as Africa, we need to come back to our senses and look at where are we going wrong, and how best can we address this thing. We are losing a lot as a continent and as a country to corruption. And these very few individuals who are controlling the economy at the expense of the livelihoods of the Kenyan people. I think going forward, we need to look at, adopt the evidence-based approach to tackle matters corruption, and to work collaboratively with other stakeholders in this country to make certain that this menace is addressed once and for all.
Okay, thank you very much. Steve Ogutu is communications strategist, as well as Dr. David Safwame, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the International Center for Evaluation and Development. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time. That brings us to a close of this live broadcast, but these are some of the things that you are expected to know at this hour. Pulling them up on your screens shortly is that the Court of Appeal has upheld the election of Marquette East Member of Parliament, Kangogo Bowen. We're also looking at the fact that the Court of Appeal has ordered fresh elections for the Lamu senatorial position. Then, meanwhile, the Kenya Revenue Authority officials have appeared before the Committee on Implementation to take a look at what exactly KRA is doing, first of all, with the matters tax collection, as well as looking at matters import and export concerns. We actually have those live pictures. I believe we can listen in a bit before we continue to take a look at some of the stories that have made headlines at this hour.
I was asking why we are not taking up sugar, which I'm not able to answer, but there has been no run on that sugar for the last 4 or 5 years. So that was an example of our being able to demonstrate that you are doing due diligence. And I'll also be talking about it when you come to item number 3, which was part of the issues we wanted to clarify.
Okay. Thank you. I think members, we can proceed. Chair, before we proceed, I think the committee has to note this anomaly, that KRA could allow a third party to import sugar on a license of an importer, a licensed importer. Because the question that would come is how many other third parties have used a license for importers to import sugar into the country. Is this the reason why we have an unregulated import of sugar?
That one, in fact, it's already flagged out. No, it's flagged out. That one is flagged out.
Kenya Revenue Authority officials appearing before the Parliamentary Committee, just probing the mandate and some of the queries that have been raised within that particular institution. And that brings us to a close of this live broadcast. Our sign language interpreter for the second half of this live broadcast has been Clement Moli. My name is Ian Ofula. Enjoy the rest of your viewing.